The PCs said that they were going to put an iron ring around it, and it felt very much like a smoke ring. And I want to make sure long term care residents are safe, but also have a good quality of life.
Special note. Hello, two things before you listen to this program. At the start of the conversation, I say that Andrea is in a leadership nomination. To be clear, she's in a nomination process to be the provincial Liberal candidate for Burlington. Two, I reached out to her opponent in the nomination process, Miriam Manna, at the same time as Andrea, hoping to do the two interviews and publish them simultaneously. Unfortunately, at this time, Miriam has not responded to any request. I've reached out to her through her contact information and via the Liberal Provincial Association for Burlington. The association assured me that they would pass along the request, but Miriam has still not responded. This puts me in a bit of a pickle, as obviously it is most fair to record them both before either candidate can see how the other responds. If Miriam turns up, I'll have to work something out at that time. But since I have received no response and have no reason to believe response is forthcoming, I think it's most fair to publish Andrea's episode at this time. Without further delay, here is One Sunny Day episode number 8. Hello, OneSunnyDay.com podcast. Today my guest is Andréa Grebenc, and she's running for the Burlington seat in the upcoming Liberal leadership contest, which will eventually lead for the victor of that will go into the provincial race to be the next member of provincial parliament for Burlington. Hello, Andrea, and welcome to the program.
Hello, Greg. Glad to be here.
Thanks. And for those people listening, if you want more information, you can get her at her website, which is trustandrea.com. But when you're writing that out, you have to use an A. So it has to be ANDREA.com, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Excellent. So welcome. And so my first question, what got you into this? Why are you running?
Well, I've been a school board trustee for 2 terms now, so 6.5 years. I'm in the middle of my second term, and also chair of the Halton District School Board. And I have found that there are a lot of issues, especially around education, that need changing. And there is just not the mechanism at the school board level to be able to make those larger sorts of changes. So I would like to see bigger changes happen across the province. And so I need to get to the provincial level to be able to do that, to have influence there.
Right. This is the provincial box model, where what happens is the school board trustees and these, like, the municipal government is supposed to, have nominal control of what's going on, but they get boxed in by this sort of legislation at the top that says, you will do this, you will do this, you will do this. And then the trustees put their hand up and they say, I'd like to do this. Then the staff says, sorry, you can't do this. We're boxed in by some provincial legislation. Is that your experience, or?
Oh, yes, definitely. And also there's a lot of process issues, a lot of red tape. We are in Halton, we're a growth board, which means we are building schools in North Oakville and South Milton on a regular basis. But because of the approval process that we have to go back to all the time to the ministry, it delays us potentially years. So it's I see a lot of improvement in that area. I see a lot of improvement needed around actually the funding. It doesn't match what the needs are. They're still using old census data to fund our region. And you can imagine if you're using like 2006 census data, that's very different than what 2021 is in Halton.
So, but I thought, now correct me if I'm wrong, I thought the base way that the top line funding works is it's going by per pupil now. Is that correct, or?
It is, but that's a bit of there's a what's called the GSN, which is the main funding. And there is actually a range, and the Halton Catholic and Halton Public boards actually sit at the bottom of the range. They only announce the average GSN to the media, but there is quite a range, and some of it absolutely makes sense. You've got more transportation costs for northern boards where students are spread out by 20, 30 kilometers. So more transportation. You can't be as efficient as you could be in a more urban board. But certainly there are some areas like special education, which do not keep up with the needs within the board.
That's because the special education formula is just per kid as well.
Well, it's actually complicated, and we're not exactly privy to how they come up with the funding formula. That's something we've been asking for them to open for many years now.
Well, okay, so this gives me an opportunity to straighten something out that people always say, because people always say, "Well, I have checked provincial or public school board or Catholic school board on my taxes," and then and I tell them that's irrelevant. That went out I don't know what year that went out the board, but that's gone now. Now all that matters is this per pupil weirdo funding formula. What you check on your taxes does not go to the local school in your area anymore. Am I
So
right?
what that yeah, you're right. What that check mark does for um, French Catholic, French Catholic, or public is that those are the slate of trustees that you will see during a municipal election. Uh, Publicly funded schools in those four systems are primarily funded right from the general coffers at the provincial level.
Okay, so we have problems in the school board and the educational funding system, and you're at the. We'll call you the. We're going to call you lower down on the pyramid, and the orders are rolling down, and you're trying to make more system-wide change by going where you can affect it more readily.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. What are your other things outside the education bracket?
Long-term care. I'm one of those people. I have kids that I'm still raising, but I have parents that are elderly, heading into their 80s, and I'm very concerned about the way the long-term care homes have been managed, especially over this pandemic. The PCs said that they were going to put an iron ring around it, and it felt very much like a smoke ring. And I want to make sure long term care residents are safe, but also have a good quality of life. Because even yesterday, I was reading in the newspaper that new builds for long term care homes don't have any mandate for air conditioning in the personal rooms. So if you are a bedridden person or if you're in isolation due to a pandemic, you are going to be sweltering in your room. And I think that's unconscionable. I think we really have to respect, people have lived long lives and contributed to the system, and we should be treating them with respect, and they should be safe, and they should be healthy and have a good quality of life.
Yeah, we have the air conditioning problem in the hospitals too.
Hmm.
Like if you work in an old hospital, you're like it is hot in this ward. So that's just a general.
And we have that issue in schools too, in our older schools. We end up with cooling areas in our older schools because we don't have the funding to be able to put air conditioning in every room in the older schools. But the big difference between long term care and schools is that kids go home at night. They don't have to sleep in it, they don't have to exist 24 hours in it. And when you're an elderly person with health problems, it's even compounded even more.
Well, listen, I'm not. Please put air conditioning on the schools. I'm not going to talk you to that. But the reality is, if you're the reality is most of the community schools are very small. They're T's. There's windows everywhere. So even when they're hot, they just tend to open all the windows. Now with COVID, they've got the windows open all the time anyway. So it does. I mean, it's an issue. It should be fixed, especially with this COVID thing. I wouldn't, but I can see how the littler schools seem less affected by the sort of the like my point is they have the oldest infrastructure, right? But weirdly they don't they're not as reactive to needing the newest infrastructure because it's really only 10 rooms, like and a little T. It's not sort of a 5-story building all built up. That said, put air conditioning in the classrooms, or upgraded, I should say. It's not that none of them don't have air conditioning. They just don't have air conditioning up to like modern standards, right? Is that
It's interesting because we a few years ago we did a survey. We constantly survey our parent community and the students, and the top thing that came out on what would help students learn better was actually air conditioning. So it was a priority for us, and where we could put air conditioning in, especially in our 3 floor schools. And we would put it in, or even in 2 floor schools. We prioritize them that way. One of the barriers we did have with some of our schools is the electric conduit coming into the system was not strong enough to be able to handle the air conditioning. So there's that sort of balance that we have to deal with as well.
okay? So you've got somehow we got back to schools. We got the school issues. We got long-term care. What are your other irons in the fire?
The use of MZOs, ministerial zoning orders, to basically bypass regulations to be able to release lands. And the minister uses it as a skeleton key, and that's just not right. There are regulations there for a reason. The conservation authorities have mandates, and to be forced to go against their own mandates to appease whatever the current ministry or current government wants is just wrong. Um, it's it's frustrating to see. We saw that out in the east end of Toronto, and we saw a conservation authority or the conservation committee resign en masse recently in the past year because they were being forced to say things that were against their mandate.
Well, I think we just have I think there's just like this problematic. There's this problematic head-to-head coming because you've got forecasted massive population growth, right? And then you're saying, okay, so we want to accommodate ever greater amount of population, but we don't want to expand. Then there's a series of don'ts, right? Well, we don't want to expand in this land. We don't want to garble up farmland. We don't want to gobble up wetlands. We don't want to gobble up conservation lands. So we want to have an ever-growing population, but we don't want to grow the physical plant of all these places. And I just think the two things grind on each other, and they just grind on each other. And everybody says, "Well, I want this, I want this, I want this." But at the end of the day, I don't think you can accommodate. Um, uh, well, this is we'll get to this question and I'll finish off my rant. But because one of the addresses, one of the questions obviously is, I think it'll come in the election, is this housing price issue, right? Like it's going to be in the election because it's a complete lockout, right? Whereas previously it was a disastrous lockout, but it was within the realm of hypothetical possibility. Now it's like 100% lockout. I cannot, for example, possibly buy the house in which I now live.
Absolutely not. Me either. I bought our current house in 2006, and it's almost tripled in price. Like, uh, there's no way. And as a parent, I'm saddened by the fact that if things continue the way they are, my children will not be able to afford to live near me if we stay in Burlington for the longest, for our retirement years. It's That makes me very sad. I love Burlington. I've lived in Burlington for over 40 years. My father's family laid down roots in the late 40s here. It is it is a great place to live, but it's so sad to be priced out of it. Something does need to happen. I'm not exactly sure what that needs to be. That's not my forte, but certainly something needs to be done.
Well, see, this goes back to the municipal zoning orders, right? And that, looks, I've been involved in this for 10 years now with just developments coming in, and they change the complexion of the surrounding subdivision, and the people in the subdivision don't like it, and the commercial stores are going out, and this is like a constant refrain from people in Burlington, right? But my 10-year conclusion, and I had a podcast with Jim Young, and he's been doing this as long as me, so it's not just my singular opinion. The basic thing that's going on is that the land use planning system right, which is based on land use planners, is really actually an urbanization system, right? Like the land use planners don't plan land in the way that you would think. You would think, okay, well, they're planning land, so there's going to be a variety of different opinions, you know what I mean, on what should be done with the land, and there's going to be a set of rules, and those rules are going to be resolved through some sort of legislative or pseudo legislative body, and we're going to come to a conclusion where everybody's needs are somehow balanced or at least registered or at least accommodated, you know what I mean, and we'll come up with what this building can be and not be. The problem is it doesn't work like that because the land use planners from top to bottom have the idea that this is the essential thing. They have from coming from schools. I'm not trying to cast evil, aspersions on them, right? But coming from school, coming from the consultants, they have the idea that there is a better community, like there is the best community, and the best community is kind of New York City.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I'm not kidding. That's like sort of the best city. Because if you take top line demographics of New York City, you'll discover the energy uses per person is low, the GDP per person is insanely high, right? And they'll say, okay, well, this is the best city. The city is the best thing, right? And so wherever you are in the mind of a land use planner, that's the process of moving towards that city, of moving towards that urbanization. And if you ask me, that's why it's the exact same template of stuff in downtown Toronto, in Oakville, in Mississauga, in Burlington, in Grimsby, in St. It doesn't matter where you are, in Beamsville. They say, oh, we got to start building some high dimensional building here, right? Because it's the only way to square the circle between massive population growth, right? Massive population growth, which is coming in through immigration and live births, and the fact that when you go to build some new land or some new highway, everybody goes nuts,
Mm.
right? And so, listen, I just think I don't think you have to worry about it. You say what is it going to be like in 20 years? The high housing prices won't be like this, right? There will be some kind of action that lowers the cost of housing, either through a series of uncontrolled, uncontrolled implosion, or people don't want to be in this region, they just won't come. It'll solve itself. Everyone will just leave. Forget it. I can go to the East Coast. I can go to Edmonton. I can go lots of places. The companies will get fed up. They'll be like, we can't attract workers. So the high housing prices at this level, if you ask me, no expert, can't stay. But I do think you're right on the loggerheads between we want this ever-growing vision of Canada, and there is no room to continue the quality of living in the same way that we're used to in this region. You're just on it. I don't think there's a clever way around it myself.
Mhm. And then the other side of thing is, Highway 413. Uh, we don't need it. We don't need it. The municipalities don't want it. This region has spoken against it, and yet it still is there, looming, and seems like a very large waste of money and valuable land. And for what? Um, yeah, I think what's also interesting is this pandemic has done a lot of making people think about the quality of their lives. I can't even count on them on both my hands. Like there's more than that number of people that I know it that have decided to, as you say, kind of move away or do other things, or they're working from uh, places that they normally wouldn't be working from. Not of course going downtown Toronto anymore. So things are changing, and I think that we need to start reassessing things from that perspective. That this, I hate the term new normal, but I do believe that we are kind of looking at that, and things are not going to be what they have been, and that goes for all sorts of parts of our lives.
Well, yeah, I would agree, but it's going to make my previous point worse, right? Because the problem is whenever I get into discussions with people, they always say, well, the skyscrapers and the density and the public transit is cheap, right? And the spread out urban suburbia is very expensive, right? Well, the problem is COVID teaches you the cost of the density is huge.
Mhm.
I'm not saying what we're going to do about this. I'm just saying I want someone to acknowledge that the usual suspects in COVID in this region for this whole thing are always Toronto, York, Peel. And that has nothing to do with the quality of humans following or not following health orders. It just has to do with the fact that the density is higher and therefore it is difficult to escape human contact. I think it's that simple.
I would agree. I would agree in many ways. I mean, just look at the living in those high rises, taking elevators. There was going back to schools because I follow that sector very closely. A lot of families in the Toronto area, especially in those high COVID areas, decided to go virtual for their kids because that trying to get to school one by one down an elevator is an insane thing to try to do every day.
And see, this is going to be my unfortunate fly in the ointment going forward. In that, I'm not saying you can't build a high rise again. I'm not saying you can't build a six rise or a mid, but not saying you can't have public transit. But I do think I want to know what the plan is if it turns out these things can't be used.
Hmm.
Right. And you're going to be like, well, Greg, you're putting some kind of limit on the height of a building or the number of, yeah, I'm putting, you put a limit on the number of people that can be in a restaurant because there could be a fire. Right. Like that's a standard thing to do. So you can put a limit on the number of people that can reasonably be in a building because if there's a pandemic, everyone has to get, the kids to school, for example. Right. And, and no one's there. I mean, if you read op-eds or something, it's right back to the previous model. How many skyscrapers can we jam here, there, everywhere, right? If you ask me, I don't see any sea change in the usual suspects. They seem to be like it's LRT and we're going right back to public transit. We're going to ram this model through, and I won't say fear, but people might just be like, I'm not doing it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not getting on public transit. Like they're just not going to do it because the COVID's not going to magically snap your fingers, go away. It's going to be lurking like this hobgoblin in the background, right? Let's just say might.
Might, yeah.
And so that's likely though. It's likely that it's just this hobgoblin in the background that's just, for puttering out for the next 10 years. It's not that a lot of people are dying. It's not that a lot of people are getting sick, but at the same time, it's not no one, right? It's like a low burning thing. And then lots of people are just going to be like, not worth it. I just think lots of people are going to be like, not worth it. I could be wrong. I don't know everybody. Right. But it seems to me what you said is true. Lots of people are, you'll say, hey, we're going to do all in, in-person classes, whatever. And there'll be this backlash of people who are like, forget it. I'm in this new system with the virtual. They've just made it work, right? In their mind, they've made it work. They're going to backlash against it and say, no, I like this new system for whatever peace of mind it brings me. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. With the upcoming school year, we've surveyed our parents, and there will be a segment that will continue online. So yeah, it's there. There's a range with every population, and we have to serve the students. We're responsible for their achievement and their well-being in our system. So if that's what it takes, that's what we do. And we're mandated as well to do it from the province.
Until you get there, and then you're calling the shots, and you can mandate all sorts of crazy things. So what do you think are going to be the big issues in the upcoming election then? That might be different than the things that you're passionate about, right?
I think that the issues around how the pandemic was handled itself is going to be a big issue. I think that, of course, with the long-term care, the listening or not listening to the medical experts and how it affected the amount of lockdown that we had to have. The vaccination rollout is going to be a topic, I believe, for certain. The current government says it's doing a great job, but really, you had to hunt down a vaccination. I signed up myself. I have so far one dose of AstraZeneca, and I'm signed up for the 30th to have a Moderna. But that first dose, I was signed up on like five different pharmacy lists. I was watching Vax Hunters on Twitter, uh, just trying to locate and capture that first dose. That's insane. And the fact that we have Halton having its own um, registration system as opposed to an Ontario system. I mean, the government had a year. They knew that this was coming. It's not like they were caught completely off guard with, wow, we have vaccines. No, there was stuff going on. And so we have this patchwork of vaccination registration depending on where you live. And it's we've seen up in Guelph that their system and their rules were different than they were in Halton, than they were in Toronto for being able to access the vaccine. And the fact that they didn't listen to their own science and health tables saying divert vaccines to the hotspots, it will have an effect across the board. And they wanted, I believe it was 50% of vaccines diverted there for 4 weeks. And the government, under I don't know what expertise, said, no, we'll do 2 weeks and 1/4. And I believe that perpetuated the wave. Like it kept going longer than it needed to go. I know we're going down now, but at what cost? We still have had people die. We still have had people get sick. And there's this whole long COVID thing that nobody really talks about much, but it's sitting there. And I think we're going to find out how large that long COVID population is and what the effect is on our healthcare system. So that's another topic. I think parents have a lot to say about how education functioned. And I mean, I won't go into that. Of course, I could talk forever about education. But the whole government idea that there were plans for vaccination. There were plans for the school systems, but really when it came down to it, no, the plans were the health units come up with their own plans. The school boards come up with their own plans, and they wasted time announcing that was the case. They kept keeping us all in suspense, saying the plans are coming, and then they didn't deliver. So, yeah, I think that sort of thing is I think the pandemic is really going to figure into this election.
Okay, so on the pandemic front, okay, I think the current cobbled together system where every region has its own health unit that's supposed to be making decisions. It's like the trustee model, right? Okay, well, you have a health unit. You're going to make decisions for your little region, right? But that doesn't work because the budget is unified. The vaccine thing is unified, right? And so now we need this other replication structure, and it just keeps cogging back and forth between, oh, well, the health units are doing something random, or not, I won't say random, that's not fair. They're doing something that they believe is specifically worthwhile to their area. And then the feds go, no, we need a unified, consolidated approach, right? So they overrule whatever those people would think is appropriate with a sort of blanket system. And then the individual health units start piling on their own rules. So it becomes a brutal and inconsistent patchwork of rules that no one knows.
Yes, exactly. Nobody knows what they are. One day it was AstraZeneca second dose. You could only get Pfizer and you had to wait 12 weeks. And then the next day, for some reason, all of a sudden it was, oh, you could get Moderna or Pfizer and at the 8-week mark. And it was like, where does this, so all of a sudden the health units they have to be on top of this all the time. And watching press releases. I mean, communication is a huge issue with this government. I know from the education system, I was getting most of my information from the press. I would get it more from the press than I would get it from the minister. We would have calls we have calls each week with the Minister of Education as a chair of the board. So there's 72 chairs on a conference call that lasts between 20 and 30 minutes. And the minister usually speaks for 10 to 15 minutes, and then we all vie to get a question before the call is over. And he would often schedule those conference calls after the press conferences. So we would learn that schools were not opening or whatever through the press rather than at least a memo or something to tell us, because we had to prepare for that. And yeah, I find that frustrating, and I wouldn't be surprised if the public health units function in very much the same way, because they have to they find out one thing one day, and then all of a sudden the rules have changed, and now and it's not just changing one website portal, they have to change them all to match whatever the minister has done. And the other thing about public health units, and I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but Halton Public Health does not do testing for COVID. It does not do PCR testing. Other health units do. And so that was very confusing for people when they wanted information about testing. If you go to Hamilton, they seem to be involved. Here, they're not involved. So they started the school testing and non-symptomatic testing. And we had to get a third party involved because it's not part of what our health unit does. Money that went to public health nurses for the system. We didn't hire any nurses in the school board. They were nurses that worked for public health, and they consulted on infection procedures and contact tracing and that sort of thing. But they would support, even though it came out of the ministry education budget, they were supporting all different kinds of schools, private, anything in the system. And I wouldn't be surprised if they had work that was outside of the school system as well, because schools have been basically shuttered except for our spec ed, special education, high needs students since April. So that contact tracing and that sort of thing isn't, and the infection control measures aren't really changing much in that time. So we're supporting, our education budget is supporting other budgets at this time as well.
Well, listen, I got 4 kids, so I'm aware of the kids have been out of school since April phenomenon.
Yes.
Like I think the problem they got into is they just got into this. They just got into this political ricochet problem, right? Where the current thing, if you ask me, the Hell Table set up like this death sentence, where what they actually wrote is, we recommend that you open the schools, right? But when you open the schools, we're going to have some number of infections driven by the schools. Like there'll be some increase in infections. And then they said, but we recommend that you just accept that increased number of infections, right? Because the global good of the school is better than the small number of infections at our current COVID rates. That's effectively, hopefully I'm not putting words in their mouth, but that's kind of the message.
That's a message that I kind of heard. But one thing that was interesting, and this was, I was approached by the Toronto Star a few weeks ago because it came out that the minister was saying that our schools are safe, but then when they uncovered notes from meetings with sick kids, et cetera, in, I believe it was December, saying, school safe? We don't know. So
But in all fairness here, the problem there is everyone has a different definition of what they mean as safe, right? If you mean the school is an area which is absolutely guaranteed for nothing bad to befall your child, right? That's never been true, never can be true, right? Something bad can happen in every rate, right? The problem is when they say safe, when they say safe, they mean based on some internal risk calculation personal to themselves.
It was more about, is COVID spreading in the schools? We don't know.
But the answer will always be somewhere. The answer is always not 0, right? and not 100%.
but that range seemed very huge. I mean, in Halton, we had a total, I think, of 38 outbreaks, very small outbreaks. So it wasn't a big deal in our system. The outbreaks would contain cases from 2 to 9 people. So not, you know, spreading and spreading or anything like that. But I would think that in hotspot areas, yeah, that there would have been bigger differences in the number of cases and families affected and potential uh, hospitalization, et cetera, that would go along with that.
In Texas, they surveyed the kids, just the kids in public school, and 1/3 of them have antibodies, active antibodies.
Wow.
Yeah, so it got everyone. No, you don't know that it went through the school system, right? Because there's lots of community spread too, so you can't verify that it's actually kid on kid. But listen, the end of the point is, even when COVID is 100% engaging through the school, right? The kids are safe in the way that we're using the word, right? Like we're using the word safe for the vaccine, not to mean no one will ever die or have a negative outcome of this vaccine.
No, no, I understand that. I think, and what concerns our families, and we have in Halton many multi generational families living together. That you want to make sure there's not spread in the school. Comes home to mom, dad, and grandma, and suddenly grandma's in the hospital or dead. So that's the big fear, and that's why I'm sure that there is a certain amount of people who are afraid of COVID for children themselves, but I don't think that was truly the primary concern of them being really sick. It was more the people that live with the students that are the biggest concern, and I think that's why, in many cases, students that participated in virtual schools, I think that's more the reason why they stayed home is because they have immunocompromised parents or they live with grandparents, or there's that sort of element that could really affect the family. Who wants to I'm sure my children wouldn't want to feel responsible for you know something happening to their grandparents. So yeah, that's. But as I said, in Halton, we didn't have a lot of outbreaks, and because there were so few outbreaks, the contact tracing. It was contained. We contained everything. But certainly in other parts of the province, there were issues.
Yeah, I don't think there's anywhere it's managed to really like rip through the school in an elementary school. Like, I mean, worldwide. I don't think there's this school that lights up like a Christmas tree. Like, if it worked, it would just be an absolute Christmas tree. It would go like 1, 10, one classroom, all the classrooms, and then it would just be like, right? I don't think anywhere in the world that at least the previous variants, anybody managed to get an elementary school to do that.
Yeah, and I think that the big question and why there's people still looking to have that virtual schooling is the Delta variant, because it does seem to have more communicability than other variants, and I mean, to the point where the UK is looking at delaying their opening, and um, it seems to have more of an effect on children. So we'll see. We don't have, of course, children under 12 are not vaccinated in our system, and I can't tell you what circumstances students will be going back to in the fall because we have not been told. The minister will tell us in July.
Yeah, but I mean, this is going to be the war. This was my point of the start of the whole thing, and I said I never thought it would come to this, but I said the problem with the way public health is going to think about things is they're going to think there's a certain number of permitted. There's a certain amount of transmission they're willing to accept, right? Before it just takes off like a thing, and then there's an amount of transmission they're not willing to accept, right? The problem is going to come is that puts them in a position of parsing out human interaction, right? Like what human interaction do we think is valuable, right? And so they can say, well, we think the human interaction of kids going to school. I agree 100%. School should be open, just to get that straight. But they're saying we believe the school interaction is valuable. You know what I mean? Okay, but we believe the interaction of the Amazon warehouse is not. We believe the interaction of Tool and Die, some company in Peel, Tool and Die, we're shutting that down. These human interactions are not worth infections, right? It seems to me that definitely that creates a human on human society-wide battle the minute you start it.
It is very interesting because I looked at Halton just the other day. They have some summary charts of uh, outbreaks, and by far, workplaces and communal living were by far the biggest places that COVID outbreaks happen. So my question is always, why weren't they really focusing on that?
Well, the theory. So the problem with the Iron Ring. So because there's lots of debates. The states. So one interesting thing I'll point out as a differential. I Early on I heard this guy talking, and he was some pandemic expert in the states, and they were talking about should we have these controlled rollouts on all the different state governments and whatever, right? And he's like, no, don't do it. Vaccines and arms. No thinking whatsoever, right? Get the old. This is just I'm just repeating what he said. Get the 65 and older done, right? And then the second you get 65, you're going to cause yourself a constellation of delays, you know what I mean, and problems by trying to produce this administrivia, just vaccines and arms. That's why in the States, you just walk into a drugstore and you say, oh, I'd like my COVID vaccine. There's no questions. They're like, that's how they're doing it, right? Because they don't want this barrier to what's your name, what's your phone number.
It'd be interesting. I mean, we're getting a little off topic here, but it would be interesting.
But that's the point of the point.
It would be very interesting to see the true demographics of who is actually getting that vaccine down there. Are they really reaching the full spectrum of low income, middle, high income, different cultures, etc. Like, are is the messaging really penetrating all those potential barriers? And I'd be surprised if that answer is yes. I would be very surprised. And considering that they seem to be hitting a barrier just in a hesitancy, or they're hitting their top end of what people are willing to take as percentage of people, which is well below what needs to happen. Uh, I'm glad that Canada seems to be getting there, but we still have a higher end to go.
Well, the states is in a the states is in a different. Listen, I read this great Atlantic article in which this whole thing was straightened out for me in a way I was like, oh, now I see what they're talking about. And this was a guy who came up with the original COVID rules in the states, right? And he said, so what happened is we came out with these rules, and we were immediately sued by everyone in sight, right? Like all the restaurants, everybody sued us when we put these rules in, restraining their business, restraining whatever. So it went to a series of court cases. Now, in those court cases, although public health likes to sort of present that they're managing infection and managing disease and managing this global public health entity, right? The legal construction of why they could do it all came down to the basic point that the only way to protect people in the minds of of experts was these measures. So if you said I'm trying to protect someone from COVID, right, and I have no other consideration in the world. I don't care about the economy, kids going to school, nothing. I'm just protecting people from COVID. That's all I care about. Obviously, the hardest, longest lockdown, Melbourne style, you can't go 1,000 from your yard from your feet. You can only be outside 1 hour a day, et cetera, et cetera. The crazier you make it, right, and the tougher and the weirder, I'm not talking about psychological damage recommending it. That will prevent the most number of people getting COVID for sure, right? But his point, the point of the whole article was the legal construction was this is the only way the experts can define to quote unquote protect people. So the second the vaccine became available, there was now another way to quote unquote protect people, right? And Puff the Magic Dragon went the construction of why these things are reasonable, and that's why the states There's no there's no there. They're just having to comply with the legal rulings, and all the things are coming up because there is now another way to protect people, e.g., the vaccine, right? So they're in a completely different universe. Plus, they have a ton of wild type spread, right? Like they
Yes.
have a ton of population with wild type spread. So they are have the body count to show for it, right? But they've effectively done a controlled avalanche, right? They didn't really control anything. They just slowed the rate of explosion down to the point where it was drawn out somewhat, right? So they're in a different universe. They don't need, like I saw this chart once that explained like the rate of growth in the vaccines, and at the end of the day, it was something like this. It was like, we'll have 60% of people with wild type exposure in the States. I'm not kidding. And then like 80% vaccinated, but they will actually own the whole vaccine process will only like help us with like this 20% band because there's so many wild type infections, which you can see a third of the kids in the Texas school system have antibodies, right? And that doesn't mean because there's different types. We're not gonna get into the whole biology of it, but when you can detect antibodies, they've definitely been exposed, right? But they could still be immune to it through cellular immunity and not have antibodies floating around. So that's the minimum, kind of. So it obviously just cruised through there, and then if you crunch the deaths per 100,000, you can see that Texas has more top line deaths to demonstrate it did in fact crush through the population. Right. This is one of my concerns because they're free. You see what I mean? They're free and out the door because of the combination of the vaccine and the wild type exposure, and we're compared to them, but we just went right in the middle.
Mhm.
Right? We controlled it enough to never get enough wild type exposures, but we didn't crush it ever so successfully that it's not here, right? See what I'm saying? It's in the middle.
Yeah, we seem to consistently sit these days around 350 or so cases, right?
Yeah, and they'll grind out. There was I mean, this is so this I don't know how to deal with. You can tell me you're a school board trustee because here's my horror in September, right? My horror in September is um, I can I can't I don't know what if damage is being done to these kids by these interventions. No one does. There could be absolutely no damage to the intervention. It's possible it's positive. I don't know. You know what I mean? But it's also positive on the periphery. You're making the periphery worse, right? That's always the concern. Every time I talk to a teacher and I say, "Hey, my kids," blah blah, like your kids are fine. You know, there's no concern. You know what I mean? Your kids are doing okay. And I'm like, okay, my kids are doing okay. And then we start get chatting a little bit, and it becomes our concern is not these kids, with engaged parents, lots of money, lots of time, believe in education, doing workbooks. They have to do workbooks all summer. I sense when they can't do the math, and I make them get back up to grade level when I can sense it, right? But when you get a family, and a family where the parents don't believe in education, you know what I mean? Or one of these things. They're the kids, it seems to me, can go through the cracks to the bottom of planet Earth.
Absolutely. We anticipate gaps, academic gaps, and also huge mental health issues coming out. I mean, I've seen it in my own kids, even. It is the isolation has really had an effect. And unfortunately, and we had this the minister of education told us a few months ago, the plan part of the plan was summer programs, and I spoke up during the conference call saying, minister, you cannot depend on summer programs to fill this long gap and all the different manifestations. And I said, just even speaking as a parent, my children have been spending forever on screens. There is no way that I would be putting my children into a summer program during those beautiful months, times to get outside, to stare at a screen for hours on end. This is that's not healthy, personally, for my own children. And to please, not I asked him not to put his all his eggs in that basket. And when everything kind of came forward and there's been analysis done, that's basically what has happened. There has been a big push on summer programs, and the analysis came down to there's about $11 per student for the next school year that is going to be put towards learning gaps. That's not enough. There are going to be major learning gaps.
Oh,
So,
like, and well, this is the, like, I read some op-ed that somebody put out there, and they're like, oh well, like like, I mean, I'm going to be preaching to the choir a little bit here, right? But
mm,
there's, if you have a student, right, and you have a full-time tutor, let's just say I have a full-time tutor just for that student, you can almost rescue any student, you know what I mean, up to whatever level it is.
oh yeah, sure. Who can afford that?
That's the point. The answer is no one, right? Like, no one can really afford that. So you always have a game. Game is sort of a cruel word, but you always have this bizarre cost per, you know what I mean? And people will say, like, well, can these kids repeat a year? I'm like, no, they can't, because the system costs $22 billion. I mean, these kids will not be accommodatable in the system an extra year, right? You tell me, because there's more kids trundling in on the back end, right?
Yes.
And it's the system just can't expand randomly by, it's it's hard. I won't say it can't, but it seems to me unbelievable that it's suddenly going to expand up, you know what I mean, to double up and triple up the education of these kids,
Mhm.
right? And then you know what I mean, and then kick off. I think that's crazy freeform delusion. We have a problem, but to say we're going to be spending whatever crazy amounts of money per kid, I just think it will happen, because I think the money will all dry up, right? That's going to be the problem. It's going to be a fight against everyone for money.
Yes, it is. Yes. I just agree with you on that. Um,
Yeah, and so there's going to be a certain amount which you can do, and then, like, you can't dispense yourself with the political realities of the people who are trying to run the government, because listen, I believe obviously in education. I obviously believe in the public education system. My kids are in public education, right? And I like that system. I enjoyed going through that system, right? I don't want to see that system die, wither and get destroyed, right? But at the but at the same time, um, you can't believe that the the government is in a position to, like, start going, hey, we're going to remove 10% of healthcare and throw it in the education budget.
no, I understand what you're saying.
I'm not saying you. I'm saying a person. I'm not saying that's your idea.
No, no, no. But what I would like to see is more communication and consultation with education partners. Many times, decisions came down without talking to actual school boards. Like, just look at this whole recent graduation announcement. I mean, it the premier announced that every child from every grade deserves to have some sort of graduation, even though that is not a thing. Grade six is coming out of a grade six school that terminates at grade six, and of course the ones in grade eight and ones in grade 12, those are usual milestones. But uh, to just announce that, to just not talk to the school boards at all about what they're actually doing and had in place and had been preparing for months, to just make an announcement and then double down on it, saying, schools can have outdoor graduations, but they have to keep to stipulations, and they don't put that sort of thing out. But like, we have a high school in Oakville, there are 500 grade 12 graduates. So, how do you have a physically distanced grade 12 graduation? And really, the regulations that they didn't really say too much is that you can only have 10 people. So, you can have two students and just their parents, and then some staff, is really all that can be part of this. So, you can imagine trying to graduate 500 students using this method and how long it would take. And on top of that, graduation ceremonies and all those sorts of extracurriculars are not mandated for staff to do. Staff do it out of the goodness of their own hearts. Uh, and so and they're working full time. So to expect that sort of turn around and drop everything and organize, and they announced it on June 10th that this is what's happening. Where's the consultation? Where was the consultation when they decided to close schools in the middle of uh, the December break, when they could have told us before? So what happens when they do that in the middle of the break? Because there was really not a lot of difference in what was going on. There were rumors it was going to happen, but they didn't do it. And then they did it the week of Christmas, when everybody was off. So you know what that means, Greg? That means that when students come back in January, and those students, well, that were supposed to come back to classes but need to stay online but do not have the technology or the connections to be able to function, they lose learning time, because we have to arrange all those things. We have to drop all these things. We have to arrange with places like Cogeco or Bell to be able to get data sticks to those students that do not have data connections. Uh, like it If they had just told us a week before, if they were having conversations with us, then we could have told them, you need to do it at this time, and then they did it again later.
Listen, I can appreciate that. I would say the problem with the whole COVID thing is that there's no one that does well. There's like zero model governments, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're getting buffeted by multiple factors. So it's all degrees of bad, effectively, right? And I think the problem is that they're trying to say it comes down to this word safe. It always comes down to this word safe, right? In that they'll say, well, this is what will happen is they've made it a determination, not that the schools are safe, right? They've
Mm-hmm.
made a determination that the schools are safe enough that the value to your whatever value mechanism that they've thought of is greater than the potentiality of the kid getting COVID and having a negative reaction. Everything has to be like that. If it's not like that, there can't be a gym class. They can't be outside. You know what I mean? They can't walk around because every moment you could slip on the rock and hit your head. Like that's every millisecond, right? So it's not a blanket of safety. It's a blanket of we're going to try and tamp down as many completely insane fatal outcomes as we can, right? While still enriching the children with the basic tapestry of humanity, right? Um, and giving them these experiences we know we need. Like there's study after study. You can't, like, if you don't let your kids run around at all, it's like a disaster, right? They do these studies, they take away the climbing stuff at the local park, then they come back 10 years later and you can see this drop
Yep.
in the kids as like this cohort because you've screwed their park up, right? Now there's just less kids running the park less time. But the problem is they get buffeted by this. They get buffeted by the silo, right? Because the people in the public health roundtable, they're definitionally experts in public health, right? But they're not experts in anything else,
Nope.
right? So they can come up. This is my grinder early on with this whole structure, in that they can come up with lots of great instructions as to what the school system should do or a public business could do, right? But they don't have how much damage that doing to the business. They don't know. They have no way to find out.
Yes, they don't have boots on the ground. They have no idea.
But they have no way in the school either. No one has any idea. Maybe you do, but the average person, I've seen no top line. How much damage has this really done?
Yeah.
Because everybody that I anecdotally talk to has one of two stories. Just talking about their kids, talking about everything. I'm sure you hear from more. My kid was a super keener before, right? Nobody had any fear of them, and they took to that computer school just like ducks out of water. They're doing their homework, they're into the computer school, they're writing their things, and I go, that's fantastic. No one had a single fear for those children before, but whatever, right? Or, and this I'll say roughly is 80%, the disengagement is unbelievable. The kids hate it. They stare at the screen painfully. They want it over, and you disengage them from learning almost better than if you tried.
Mhm.
And can you put Humpty Dumpty back together again? I don't know.
Yeah, it's a real quandary. And um, I mean, I what we asked as a school board, we sent a letter at the beginning of January saying, please consult with school boards. Like, put get a retired director, talk to the council of directors of education in Ontario to understand the implications of the things you're saying or suggesting, and to run it by them before it's announced, because once the toothpaste is out of the tube, it is a mess. When we're trying to all, what does this mean? This is the implication. Did they realize this was the implication? No, because they didn't talk to us.
It's because they're this is like just to give them a little bit of credit, right? I don't think there's any way for them to square the circle. Like, I'll just say emotionally. Okay, there's a stay-at-home order. You have to take this pandemic super seriously. You have to deal with all sorts of restrictions. You know what I mean? You can see no one. The kids should still go to school. Because the average person takes those two pieces of information and integrates it and goes, if it's such an emergency, why do the kids have to go to school? Right? Because they're 50, don't have kids. They're like, surely this can be made up later. The kids seem running around the park to me. You know what I mean? The problem is they get, if you just ask me and we go to the average person that knows nothing about this, because we're like way deep in it, right? Like, we're confused. The average person listens to two newscasts, does their job, is involved in their public things. It does not have the time
Mhm.
or the wish to have anything to do with it. And then, as crazier as it gets, I notice more and more people completely checking out of the whole thing. They don't even know what the rules are. Google, COVID, new restrictions. Don't show me this. Don't show me this. Don't show me this. They're free ball. They have no idea what's going on.
No idea.
They ask me, what are the rules?
I I know. Well, because we've been through color coding systems, and they keep reinventing what is going on, and giving it new sort of styles and things like that. Well, people get confused. People just want the basics. Just give them the basics. Can I have my best friend over for a barbecue in my backyard? Yes. No. Not, oh, how many people? And okay, so this week it's this many people, and then this week it's going to be this many people. And like, it just, and it may be different for this region, but not this region. And I mean, we saw the region by region thing happening last summer, and into the fall. And we even saw that in winter. Now we're all kind of going together, but then, people in certain regions, they're seeing zero cases, but are still in a lockdown. And
It's gonna be re-regionalized in 2 weeks. I can almost tell you that if I know the bag, if I just synonymize, this is just pure speculation, right? What will happen is they'll get to this place again, and then they'll just be a frank discussion. Well, quite frankly, there's all these regions, because the reality is, Halton as a group, right? If it's not reseeded by external COVID infections, right, probably can't sustain the reaction. What I'm saying is the natural RO of Halton going about its business might be R0, right? Like, or R.9. It might just be dying out in Halton no matter what, because everyone's in cars. It's so easy to stay away from people, right? The whole, if you ask me, the whole political, whatever you want to call it, machinations between the regions and the not regions, whatever, is just system after system after system to try and paper over the fact that there's no way to let Toronto out of it, right? And no reason these other regions really need to be under these things, right? Like, I mean, it comes down to your personal judgment on what you think is important, right? Like, I think the education of the kids is very important, especially the sort of high, because that's the construction with the wealth comes, right? To do the long term care homes and all these niceties. These are niceties. Like, I would like every elderly person in Canada taken care of to a level of dignity and engagement that I would like to be taken care of myself, right? I have elderly parents. I don't have 8 Gs a month or whatever the flash long-term care facilities, they exist, you know what I mean, have there. So I would like that whole system, but that depends on an incredible amount of excess productivity, right? It depends on it, and that productivity has to come from the young,
yeah.
right? And if they don't know, if their education is not as good as it could be, they're going to produce less. right? Like this is just the grimy reality of it, right?
Mhm.
You can see that. I can start destroying years of high school. Like if I just started destroying years of high school, right? You would just see it in the workforce immediately. There's just less people, not an individual person. There's always weird person that does well. There's always weird person that does well despite every single imaginable thing being against them, right? And there's a person who craps out despite having everything going for them possible. We're just talking about the general population of when we go and we do our population demographics. So I think this is the circle they can't square, right? Because if you sit there and you say, well, this has to be the rules for everyone, right? If there's no COVID in your area or very little, there's effectively no risk, right? There are all the semantics about 1 or 2 doses. Well, if you've had one Pfizer, it's like you're 98.6% or sorry 94% or something like this protected from Delta hospitalization, and with 2 doses, it goes from 94 to 96. It's 2% difference. Okay, so that makes a huge amount of difference to the spreadsheet in public health, and makes absolutely no possible difference to you going about your life whatsoever. You do not sit there and go, well, there's increased Labor Day road traffic. Therefore, I'm not going to travel because the risk of me being in an auto accident is slight. Nobody thinks like this. This is just, ridiculous, right? So it doesn't make any difference to you on a personal level, right? But it makes a difference to public health. So they keep puking out these nonsensical messages, right, to get people to respond how they want them to respond. You know what I'm saying? Because they want this global public health initiative thing to succeed on this macro level, right? But on the micro level, it varies, right? So if there's no COVID in your area and you have friends, if there's no or very little, right, and you're getting along in the backyard, whatever public health says or whatever the Ontario government says, there's almost no risk, right? But if you're in the middle of downtown Toronto in the thing, and you can't effectively do that,
Mhm.
well, then the risk is much higher. And they're trying to not show off this huge discrepancy by saying everyone's over the huge the same rules, right? And then people start putting their hands up and goes, well, this doesn't make any sense. Is there any possible way I'm going to get COVID golfing? And they're like, well, not golfing, but maybe if you turn it into a social event afterwards, it could be. And that's my point. They get squared up on this gibberish of inconsistencies because they don't want to sit there and go, the schools are never really safe. You know what I mean? In the way you're thinking about 100% with COVID, right? There's never going to be, there will never be a single day for the next 10 years in any configuration of human life where there's a 0% chance that you come down with COVID. There's always going to be some guy from some place, just got off a plane, you know what I mean, and had a breakthrough case, and then their kids in the school, and you know what I mean. But they're going to be so few and far between. They're going to go down past the level in which we consider it crazy to worry about these things.
Mhm.
It'll just go down below where we're like we consider this nuts now. But I mean, this gets back to, I'll just tell you one story, then we'll move off COVID and the school system. But like, to see how affected, I got flagged. I had the sniffles or something, right? I can't remember what band this was. So I'm like, I get tested, I'll be responsible, right?
Mhm.
So I'm like, okay, kids, you can't go to school. This is when they were still going to school, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, you can't go to school on Monday because I got to wait for this test, and it's. I said, oh, what I said is it was on the weekend. I said, what's gonna happen tomorrow? I'm like, I don't know what's gonna happen. I'm gonna wake up, I'm gonna read the test, right? And if it's positive, then you guys aren't going to school for the next 2 weeks. And if it's negative, you can go to school, right? And they're like, what if it's? I'm like, it's no problem, it'll be fine, but you just can't go to school for the next 2 weeks if this happens to be positive. That's just the rule, right? And so I was explaining this to them, and then my grade 2 says, but we'll go back to school in 2 weeks. I'm like, yeah. And she just goes, can I not tell them that you had COVID? And I said, yeah, but I'm past COVID. And he goes, doesn't matter. If the other kids catch wind of the fact that you had COVID, they're going to scream and run away from me. And I go, that's not good.
No, absolutely. I mean, there are so many those sort of influences on students and families. One thing that I was really frustrated about is the fact that, yeah, of course, you know about the screenings that you had to do every day for the students. And so if you ended up with a red screen that said, you can't go to school, there was nothing on there that said, you, here are some sort of social safety nets to help you because as a parent, you shouldn't be going to work if your kid can't go to school. So those parents that there could have been, and who they would, I'm sure there were parents that didn't do the screening because it's not in their best interest to know if their child has COVID because you end up with a real quandary looking at that red screen and if you have precarious work.
You end up in a, listen, the problem is that you end up in a quandary. Like if you want to talk about, disproportional impacts and all these things, did anybody ever go to the Oakville Testing Center? It's not a bus. There's no effective public transportation access to this. I mean, if you went to it once, you would notice it. Well, there was a stop, but it was like miles away. Like it was like there's a stop by Highway 5. It's like miles away. So and then you're getting on the bus. So let's think through the theory here. So the theory is you think you might have COVID, and then you're going to get on a bus. That doesn't make any sense. Like it doesn't make any sense right there. Then you could take this huge journey, get it at the stop, walk like a it's a huge walk to the front door of the thing, go to the thing, reverse that whole process, right? You're not going to like. There's no way that happens at the same rates as somebody who could just jump in a car and drive to the front door. There's no way. Yet no one sat there and said, "Well, hold on a second. Can we somehow subsidize Uber trips to and from?" Like there's a whole bunch of just a constellation of basic stuff that just never materialized. But like I'm more concerned because just to, see, I think when the minute you have an opening, the minute people say it's open, you know what I mean? Just politically, because the question was what's going to be in the next election. I would say once it's open and the public health people are hopefully out of your face, like the school is normal, the hospital is going to take a long time to get normal, long-term care is going to take a long time to get normal. Like even whenever the Alberta guys like we're open, except we're still meddling with the rules of the hospital. That it'll just disappear. People are like, oh, whatever happened happened. We got to here. We can't even emotionally get back to there, right? It's like we can't. I don't want to talk about what happened the night of the fire. I'm done, right? It's like we're now going forward. But the massive cost legacy and then the what to do going forward will power it. Now I noticed on your website a basic income thing.
Mhm.
So you can talk about that because you put it on your website.
Yeah. So when the current government came into power, they said they weren't going to touch the basic income pilot that was going on, and they ended up closing it, uh, even though it was potentially benefiting a lot of people. And I mean, I even knew an individual on it, and people have a misconception about basic income that it's some sort of uh, pogey that people just sit on, they don't do anything, and the money just comes to you. Well, the person that I knew was on it worked two part-time jobs to try to make a full-time job, wild schedules, all sorts of things, but they are the working poor. They had a child, so single mother with a child, barely making ends meet, and that income helped just the quality of life be a little easier. Not the stress of will I be able to make rent? Will I be able to feed my son? Will I be able to, you know, it's okay. We can actually breathe. Um, and I think that we really need to allow people to have those kind of breathers in life. If I think basic income is definitely something that should be reconsidered, and I think, especially, I also mention on my website the minimum wage, the current government also came in and stopped the progress of moving up minimum wage. And you've seen things have gone up in price quite a bit, even just over the last year. So that minimum wage has become worth less and less. Um, I mean, just even looking at the cost of bread, it's not going far. So, families that depend on people who are functioning in a minimum wage way. And we saw again during the pandemic that people lost their jobs. Students actually ended up supporting their families more, and students tend to make minimum wage. So there's again lots of things have happened since the pandemic began. And I think we need to take a good look at it and see, are we really kind of taking care of each other? Um, it's all sing song and everything. We're all in this together, but we do have uh, sort of, I think, a philosophy as Canadians, as Ontarians, that we don't want our friends and neighbors to be suffering. And I think that that's basic income and making minimum wage reasonable is at the heart of that sort of thing.
I'm 50-50 on basic income. I think the problem with the basic income always becomes the beggar. So there's two cons. So two people have there's like two big theories. So the number one basic theory of the basic income is like the base of income, and then you destroy every other program, and then you live off the efficiencies of it. So you say we're going to make this basic income, relatively huge. Let's just say $2,000 a month for the sake of argument, right? And then once we do that $2,000 a month, this is a very easy program. You're in Ontario, you're a citizen or permanent resident. We write you a check. We don't need 400 people in this office, right? This is very, we can detect who they are through various means. We just write them a check. And therefore, the whole constellation, I'm not saying this is my idea, I'm just saying this is one of the ideas. The whole constellation of these government services that do everything from trying to control rent, to do affordable housing, to subsidize housing, to all these outreach programs, you could just blow them up. You just take them all away, because we'll have this super efficient uh, distribution mechanism. I, I've crunched the numbers a couple times. I don't see I don't see how you can make the monetary process work at the top, right? Because you can never you have to tax someone to pay for this, right? It has to be someone paid, and you can never tax them 90%, or they just stop working, altogether. So there's a very narrow band in which you can really tax uh, uh, these magical high wage earners before they just sort of weirdly shut down, or do something else, or there's it's not tax evasion. They just do something they're not going to be taxed by, today, right? So instead of making paintings and selling them, let's say, if you're a highball artist, if you making so much money, you just make paintings and put them in your basement, because you're like, well, why am I going to sell them if I'm just going to get taxed at this extremely high rate and get nothing, right? So you create weird efficiencies at the top, and then there's sort of a second person that's like the basic income, and we blow everything away, and we make like 10 billion off the efficiency of just eradicating all these government programs across the board, right? Um, and then there's a second person, which is like, I want this to be part of the sandwich. It's just another layer on the sandwich. You know what I mean? And I sort of imagine this basic income, but it's kind of means tested. You know what I mean? And part of the sort of social safety net layer, if you would. So I think that the big you don't have to like explain out the whole policy, but the basic differential there is, does everybody get it? Like, does everybody just get it mindlessly, or is it selected? You know what I mean? Who gets it and who doesn't? And then does it blow away other programs, because this would be more efficient to operate, right?
Well, I think that, I mean, they were doing a pilot. So they were collecting data, and I think that data would have been valuable. Um, but that pilot no longer existed. It didn't finish. So we don't know, the long-term effects. We would have been, they closed the pilot just in 2018. So we would have been 3 years understanding from that point what it actually means. But since they got rid of it, we got to kind of start over, don't we?
Well, okay, so I push back a little bit because the problem is if you do a study on does giving people money make their lives better, the answer is yes, right? Like there's no I could just guarantee if you take the Canadian child benefit, right? Like you go into people's financial situation before and the financial situation after, they're doing much better, for sure. And a significant amount of that spending has trickled down to the kids. It's there's no way, like some amount has gotten to them through some mechanism or not. So I'm sure that's true. The problem, I don't really think you can study it because there's going to be so many moving parts, right? Like even if you start going, okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to have like a basic income of $2,000 a month. We're going to go tax free up to like let's say 40 grand, right? But then we're going to have a 50% income tax starting at 40 grand way up the line. Just because you're revolutioning all of society here, right? You're completely changing almost every dynamic you can imagine, right? And we implement that just as a financial solution, then we see how we do, right? Everybody's income changes a little bit, but it's to me incredibly difficult to figure out how it's going to play out.
No, absolutely. I think that we should look to places that have implemented, of course, something along those lines. Um, I mean, the thing is, at the certainly at the what the program was targeting at the time were low income, and we know. I mean, you know that all that money went back into the economy, and it's not like people that were on the basic income pilot were hoarding away the money. they were they were using the money for basic things, and so it's. I guess I'll just stop there.
Well, I mean, listen, now this is, I think, something coming. Nobody wants to face this. But really, when you get into all these pockets, what you have is because of the modern world and computers and science and all these things, right? It gets harder and harder and harder to be a person that can contribute something that other people are willing to involve themselves in an interaction with you, right? Like if you get now you sort of have YouTube, right? You can go listen to a whole constellation of just random people on the internet, right? But the number of people who are doing that is still very few, right? Like 8 billion people can listen to one person, right? Just talk on the internet, right? So the what you would have to bring to the table in terms of energy, invention, ingenuity, I don't even know what constellation thing it would be to go knock the number one YouTuber, I think it's like PewDie or whatever I think is his name, off his 8 whatever it is million billion, I don't even know, throne, right? That constellation is higher and higher and higher. So like, you get Jason or not Jason, you get Justin Bieber kicking out hits, right? But Spotify gets 40,000 new tracks a day.
Wow,
That's how many people that are creating a piece of music in sort of the creative economy.
that's amazing.
It's incredible. It's scary as heck, right? They're. I mean, it's not easy to make a sound on the computer that you're proud enough to put out there as your single, right? So there's a huge constellation of things coming in, but the same Rihanna is still getting rich, right? The same Britney Spears. They're just siphoning all of the attention, all of the thing to them, right? So my point is, if somebody goes and buys something or wants to watch Britney Spears or whatever they are, this is a completely consensual transaction, right? Like they want to go see this person. They're paying money. You can't get involved in it. Whatever they want to pay to go to a concert, what can you say? They have the money. They want to go see the concert. They want to see this person. She's rich, whatever. It's very hard to dig into this. You know what I mean? And find a thing. So I think what you're getting is an ever greater bifurcation between people who can operate in some little sector, let's say, to a level where they can be involved in a lot of, I'm going to say, consensual transactions, right? Like if you put your hand up right now and you're like a technical welder, job in 3.5 seconds. Like we don't need any intervention there. If you're like a computer programmer style person, there's no problem, right? There's not teams of computer programmers putting their hands up going, where am I going to work next, right? But that is an extremely complicated 25-year trick, right? Or maybe 30-year trick before you have this productive citizen that can involve themselves in this contraption, right? So I to me, it's like there's a ratio between people that can operate in a society in a completely uh, 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 non-governmental. You don't need the government doesn't need to interfere in it. Somebody will hire them and they'll be fine, right? And this is where education comes in. You want to produce as many of those people as possible. You want to get as many people as possible into that zone where they can do that, right? Now you're always going to have people that can't do that. Like kids, obviously can't wouldn't expect them to be able to do that, right? Elderly, people who are disabled, you get a bad break with a kid that's hurt, all sorts of stuff, right? You can't involve yourself in this construction. So it's like a ratio of those two things. And I'm always like, there's lots of bad ratios. You don't want to pile up a huge number of people that can't be employed in your society, even if they're great, because there is no job for them. You see what I mean? And that gets back to the basic income. Is that if it, is that you have to just have this ratio of this extremely rich society, to even be contemplating it, right? Because there's gonna be a certain number of people that abuse it. There's gonna be a vast majority of people who do very well with it. You know what I mean? And then there's gonna be just a small number of people who do insanely well with it, and be like, well, now I'm getting basic income. I can quit my job and open my dream restaurant, and and it flowers, right? So it's I don't know what to do with this whole basic income concept. But I don't think you can study it honestly, because you're going to have this study, and it's going to explain that putting the money in people's hands benefits them, right? But you have to do the reverse study of a family trying to get by with.
Basically a placebo.
No, well, you have to go to the rich person and take the money away from them,
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. That's. Mhm.
because that's the other half of the study, isn't it?
I suppose, in a theoretical sense.
Yeah, but when you do it, it's real. When you actually go to do it and you say, hey, we're going to do this, you need a lot more money. The money has to come from somewhere.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Not enough rich people. It has to come from the middle class. There has to be this harder slope once you're past this base, right? It could work spectacularly. See, I don't know, right? It could be that you free up so much. It could be that you free up so many people that go, oh, you know what? I am a computer science major, but I've decided I want to be an architect. That was my deal. You know, they're now free. They go into that. They prosper hugely, and that happens like all over the place. Just huge optimizations everywhere, and everything explodes up. Or it could be an unbelievable super disaster that destroys Western society as we know it. So somewhere in between there.
There we go. Hmm.
And then I noticed one of your you had 6 points on your website. One of them was equality and anti-racism initiative. Is that a fair?
Yes. We certainly have seen uh, lately, and beyond just lately, that there's our sort of happy concept of Canada is is a bit of a fallacy. I mean, I'm even looking at, and this is going, of course, a little beyond my website, but just looking at the whole residential school system. Uh, I mean, I'm nearly 50, and the last the last residential school ended or closed in 1996. I was 22 when they closed that, and I had no idea, no concept of it. I was brought up on this um, historical idea that the birth of Canada and how we've treated the Indigenous people, it's all been lovely and roses and agreements that everybody's kept up on, and that was just so wrong. And so, you know, I in the recommendations from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in 2015, um, this sort of thing started coming out and coming to light. And in our school board, we we actually put forth a motion that every student would know about residential schools who goes through our system. But that is still, there's so much discrimination out there. Um, I mean, you see it in the foster care system. Um, I mean, I'm talking across the country, but then you also see, of course, discrimination. We saw the terrible terrorist attack in London, Ontario, on the 6th of June. Uh, just someone just wiping out almost an entire family because they were Muslim. They were wearing traditional Muslim clothes and they were walking on the side of the road. That is horrible. It is unconscionable. I condemn it. Everybody should condemn it. That should not be our Ontario. That should not be our Canada. Um, yeah. Yesterday, I attended. There was a meeting of action down against Islamophobia down at City Hall at 7 o'clock. So that would have been the 18th of June, and it was very interesting. They had a series of speakers, and there was lots of honking as people, they had signs up and lots of honking of support. Um, but talking to the people there and hearing their speakers, there is a real problem. There is a real fear. I talked to one mother there who her daughter, and this was before the London incident, her daughter is afraid of, and who is in high school, is afraid of walking alone in her hijab because she's experienced and heard messages from people in the community that are very unwelcome and frightening, really. We should not accept this. We need to educate. We need to promote that we are all one. We are all children and parents and brothers and sisters. We are all one, and we need to understand each other. And I think that we really need to, work on this at a governmental level. I know school boards are working on it, but it needs to go further in the community, in the province, in the country. We need to face our horrible truth and fix it.
I mean, the horrible, loserly, pathetic, disgusting, repulsive running down of a family walking by a guy in a truck is is beyond the pale of any conception of, I mean, evil. I mean, that's like the definition of evil. And if anybody in their head thinks that they're going to do anything like this, people are going to be talking about you. You're not going to be remembered fondly. There is no but, there is no defense. You're going to be utterly condemned as a piece of garbage, and I'm going to suggest that that's a correct assessment. And there's no defense of any of that. My concern when it gets to kids is your message right there, right? Is kind of the old school anti-racist message. But when it gets to kids, and the various ages, I think it's very difficult to craft a message that comes from the teacher that doesn't potentially have some kind of bizarre rebound that's very difficult to implement in a way that you don't maybe make things worse, even though you don't know, right? Like when you sit there and you say, we're going to have a focus on sort of any kind of anti-racism you pick, right? Like anti-Blakism, anti-Indigenous racism, right? And you say, we're going to focus on these two things. The problem immediately is you get the anti-Asian group saying, I'm not exactly, haven't run into nothing. You know what I mean? And then you'll get like Jewish groups going like, "Hey,
Mhm.
still getting an occasional swastika in the parking lot, right?" And and I fear that the minute it becomes a concentrated list on one group, right? Grievance or not, the indigenous certainly have a massive grievance with the residential school system. I'm not suggesting they don't, but um, I don't know how you don't start creating in an attempt to fix one issue, create a bubbling up of animosity that you can't help. Like for example, the Toronto School Board put in a support. I think there's like 20 staff that are designed to support Black youth who are struggling in school. Right? Great, I like that. But what I don't like about it is it strikes me that if now I am a parent in this school board, and my kid's Asian and they're struggling, they can't access this service. It just seems to me to be this uh, potential disaster, right? Of by highlighting one grievance, the other constellations of grievances that exist in the world feel like their grievance is not being highlighted. You see what I mean? And then it bubbles up into people screaming at each other at trustee meetings.
Yes, I see what you mean. I think that it can be this issue can be dealt with in a more sensitive way, uh, like in schools. Students um, talking about their culture among the rest of their classes, and you know you know, trying to understand each other. I've always really appreciated the world religions course that is taught at the high school level, and um, my daughter actually just took it in grade 12, and though I think it is a grade 11 course, um, and she wanted to take it. I encouraged her to take it. I almost think it should be mandatory because it's one of those things. You need to understand the people who you are with and why they do the things they do, why there are certain holidays that are at different times, why they wear what they wear for symbolism, and why, and how can we work together?
Yeah, listen, I like all that, and the thing about grade 11 is a good university is going to blackjack them anyway, right? Like if you go to a good university, right, they will have been maybe not so much anymore, but they will structure if it's good to hit you with all sorts of uncomfortable things that you don't like. You know what I mean? To like, if they're not going to I mean, they're going to be challenged at some point. Hopefully, if the university is good as a good core curriculum, it will challenge you, even if they don't really believe it. But they will challenge you with different ideas, just to hit you with a different idea and see if you can, think your way out of it. My only concern is when you get to younger kids, and so the example is my daughter who would be going into grade 3, right? Who's 8. Her best friend just happens to be a quote unquote racialized. I guess that's the term of the day, racialized person, right? She sees absolutely no difference between her and her friend. There's no difference between her friend. And I fear that if somebody starts coming in here and going, no, 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 you and your friend are not the same, right? Your friend actually lives in a completely different dimension, right? Where the systems of Canada have been conspiring against her since day one in subtle and non-subtle ways, right? To put her into a different dimension, even though she effectively lives in Burlington and has almost exactly the same lifestyle. But you know what I mean? That's not going to be the message in the classroom, right? They're in this complete and total different dimension, right? And therefore, there's a whole series of sensitivities and a whole series of things you have to do. The thing that I've never figured out about that is that once you cross over from the general Martin Luther King, we don't want discrimination against any group. See what I mean? Like we're not trying to prop up one group and say they've suffered some differential past and therefore we need to discriminate them. We're saying, it's the old, judge someone by the content of, their character, not the color of your skin, right? Once you take someone, you put them in this different dimension, right? And you especially add some of the anti-racism sensitivity. There's microaggressions. There's this, there's that. You have to watch that. You say this, watch you that. The teacher's extremely explosive. Like the teacher's in this of extremely explosive environment where they say one thing, boom, file, big, you're a trustee, you know about this. Powers up to the top, investigate. So it powers up. My fear is the more that is amplified, how does the solution not become in that person's mind disengagement? Right? They just go, this is a dangerous minefield to talk to this person. I don't know if you see what I mean?
And so that's why, I mean, going back to the school board, that we are implementing training to our staff on how to have these critical conversations with other staff members, with students. We have an equity uh, and we have an equity team that helped develop this training. We actually even have a equity and human rights advisor. She happens to be a lawyer, but she used to work with the Peel District School Board, and she now works with us, Dr. Joel Moa. And um, to really try to balance, because I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying. That avoidance. Well, if I don't talk about it, nothing's going to explode in my face. But we have to talk about it.
No. I mean the reverse. I mean I mean the reverse problem. I mean there's someone else of a different sect, culture, religious structure, right? If I engage with them, even beyond saying hi, right? Well, now the lawyers and the training, right, and everything I've just thought about came to bear. Here's where I noticed this. I got a new neighbor, right? The neighbor came over and I said, "Where are you from?" Right, and then I just meant, where were you previously living before you came to this location on Earth, right? Now they knew exactly what I meant, and there was no issue, right? But that's considered, I don't know if it is. See, I don't even know. I couldn't tell you if I was in the school board and I was a teacher and there was a new person in the lunchroom, could I ask that question or not? Would that be like considered a bomb question? Would it be considered offensive? To some people it sure is, and some people it assumingly isn't, right? But my concern is that if you take the people and you say, well, hold, this person is in this different group, right, and is being screwed over actively by the system, that's going to be the follow-on message. It's active too. It's not passive, right? The message is not, well, there is this terrible thing that happened in the past in the residential school system. By the way, we've closed those. You know what I mean? There's, it's not like Western society is like problem solved. This is all going so,
No. Our structures are built in a racist framework, uh, in a heteronormative framework, and we need to acknowledge that. When my daughter was in grade 8. One of her close friends was Black, and I had a conversation with her to say, you know, um, that her friend, I don't want to name her, of course, but that to recognize that her life is probably incredibly different than what you experience, even though you have spent the last 10 years together. um, and so she experiences uh, she experiences probably discriminatory language towards her, um, actions towards her, and it was a very interesting conversation. No, she didn't acknowledge that she was aware of anything, but I'm sure her friend certainly felt it, and uh, it was an important conversation to have, because I think that that has carried her forward to have a broader understanding, um, a little bit of what that her experience is not the norm for everyone. And I think that's really what we need to get through everybody's head is, just because you've lived your life and you come from a certain background, and in this country, white heterosexual doesn't mean that everybody else does. And so, you know, people just need to open up their eyes and have empathy. I've always felt that empathy is really the top value of all values that we should have. Be able to empathize with someone, be able to really see what their life is like and help make things better.
Oh, listen, I'm not complaining with any. Listen, I don't know exactly what you guys are rolling out, so I don't have a complaint,
Okay.
a specific complaint exactly what you're rolling out.
Yeah.
I just, I my fear is that when you guys go into a classroom, whatever you roll out to the kids. I'll give you a perfect example. So when I moved into grade 9. I was in grade 9 school in Scarborough from whatever, right? I remember sitting there watching this video. It was like an anti-racism video, and then it became very clear that the anti-racism video was targeting anti-Ukrainian racism. I don't know how many years they've been showing this video. No, I'm telling you, it's 100% video. There's a little Ukrainian kid. He's eating meat sticks. The kids are
Mhm.
throwing rocks at him. It's like, he's completely embarrassed by this Slavic heritage. I assume there must have been. This, I think, is historic, right? Like if you go back long enough.
Well, yeah, yeah. I mean, when my father came as a refugee to Burlington, he did not speak English. He was from the former Yugoslavia, and yeah, he experienced that sort of. Um,
So anyway, the point is they had this video. It's a well-intentioned video, right? But until this millisecond, I never even knew to be ashamed of my Ukrainian heritage. Like, it had never occurred to me, come up. Nobody was saying it, right? And I can kind of remember the air getting sucked out of the room with the horror of this, right? And I didn't tell anybody like about my Ukrainian heritage for, like, it took me probably 10 to 15 years to sort of osmose that this has gone away. You know what I mean? As an issue, right? But just in having the video and creating this, I understand what they were intending. You see what I mean? But I don't know that it doesn't. I think it's very hard just to say, like, the kids are not taking what we tell them at face value. You know what I mean? They're running it through their little contraption. And I mean, the 2 and the 3-year-olds are crazy and terrible to everyone. Like, they're terrible to everyone in the playground from my perspective of what the ideal sort of behavior would be, right? You get these stories, et cetera, et cetera. And that, my only concern is the othering is rebound. And then the other thing is that the reality of the situation, right? I mean, I'm not saying I have some master plan on how to solve these problems, but I do have a concern where the reality of the situation can be overemphasized over the ideal situation, right? E.g., you have to fake it until you make it, right? So, if you spend too much time harping on the negative past failures or current failures of Canada, right, and you don't produce enough pride in the construction, right, to want to feel good in the world and doing positive in the world, right, then you get a really negative effect. Like, I've noticed from all sorts of places, like, this little line will come sort of cascading through on a positive note. Like, they'll say something like, litter hurts the earth. And I'm like, yes, litter hurts the earth, right? And deforestation is bad. I'm like, yes, deforestation is bad. But at the same time, if you never cut down a single tree, or produce a metal syringe that you're throwing out, there's no way to inoculate people with COVID, against COVID. You see what I mean? So there's a complexity of tension with these things, and the kids have one side of it, right? And I don't know that you necessarily drive them in a direction you like. Am I making sense on that? I think you can unintentionally drive them in a fixation on things that won't turn out positive, because you'll in-group them and they'll say, well, you know what, if there's this different group with a whole set of rules and a whole set of complexities, and I get super in trouble if I say or do the wrong thing, well, I'll keep to a group where that doesn't come up.
yes. Well, there's. I mean, I see sort of your point. Um, I also think that we can't ignore the experiences of the people in our society that are marginalized, that are being discriminated against. And the only way we can make that change is to bring it to light. It only benefits those sort of at the top of the food chain to ignore what's going on beneath.
Well, I'm not. See, the only trouble with the whole construction is that is that you if you say to someone, okay, well, I don't think I'm actively discriminating against anyone, right? Like I honestly don't have this active process in my head where I'm screwing over people actively based on their racial appearance. I'm more likely to screw people over if I find them charming or enjoyable to be around or not. Not that I'm in the business of screwing people over, but you know what I mean, right? You just naturally are more if you've got three plumbers, the plumber you like, everything else being different, you're like, I like this guy, he's funny or whatever. But I don't think I'm actively doing it. I'm pretty sure the kids don't think that they're actively doing it either, right? So if you come in and you say, okay, well, we have this construction, no one's actively doing it, but it's at this subconscious level. It's like in the background fabric of society. Nobody can really put their finger on it, but it's 100 things anyway. The ask is doesn't change anything you do or say, right? It's like even you receiving this information doesn't mean I'm not subtly going around doing the exact same racism I was before.
But what understanding your privilege though is important.
Yeah, no, I'm not. The problem with the privilege concept is, everybody has a huge constellation of massive gifts that was given to them, right? Compared to some groups, you got screwed over, right? My acting career got cut short by Brad Pitt. He took all those roles. I just got, destroyed, right? I don't mean that sounds like a bad flip joke, but you know what I mean, right?
Mhm.
There was a huge constellation of things I could never go into. I would have never made it as a basketball player. Like, there's other people who had attributes in those things, right? Now, there's people who don't get those advantages, and the first and easy advantage is money, right?
Absolutely.
Like if your parents are working two jobs,
But people tend to choose people that are most like them. So, as a white gentleman, if you have
you just outed me on the radio. No one knew that till you said. Anyway, continue. It's okay.
if you have three plumbers in front of you and you're interviewing them for whatever you're doing at your house or whatever, um, you are most likely to pick the person that is all things qualified. You're most likely to pick the person that is that you would feel most comfortable with and is most like you. So if one of them's white and two of them are not, you are most likely to pick the white one.
Maybe, but does telling me that change that process?
It it may make you more open to going, hey, I consciously picking that person because or unconsciously picking that person to do the job because they're white. And it may make you open to selecting someone else. And by selecting that other plumber, you're helping them with their money issues that we also just talked about.
But most people, I think, already think that they're attempting to do that, right? Like most people think in their head they're trying to be fair, right? Like they could be wrong. I'm not saying that they're not delusionally wrong, right? But they think in their head they're trying to be fair. So when you come in there and you add this extra layer, I'm not sure it gets you out of the problem in the mind of a kid, right? Because they're like what the kids affect. The problem is the kids affect very little to nothing, right? They can't vote, they don't pay taxes, right? So you're just talking about personal interactions, but it it occurs to me that if you just sit there and you say this person, because you're putting them in camps that they don't necessarily have, right? Like you're deciding the matrix of their racial identity is more important than their matrix of their income, right? Which doesn't even matter because all the rich kids are in private school and we wouldn't see them. But you're saying, okay, well, these are the categories that matter, and you're putting them in the category, so you're othering them. See what I'm saying? You're othering them in a way that they may not have decided, right? That this person is in this different group, has had this construction. They might have, absolutely, right? They might not have. I don't know. I don't know their specific, my specific trajectory. I didn't see a massive difference in the treatment or the mentality of most of the people that I grew up in Burlington with, but they're all, see, to me, they're all of different racial persuasions, but they're all the children of professionals living in Burlington. Like the unity there is on that bandwidth is huge. Like every kid was expected to go to university. Like
Yeah,
pressure.
and that's but Burlington is much more diverse than that now, and there are certainly pockets of um, uh, new immigrants and refugees and all sorts of people that don't have that experience. And I wonder if you actually went back and talked directly. I mean, you're directly to the people you grew up with from their diverse backgrounds, if they actually have, whether in Burlington growing up or since, had uh, any issues with discrimination. That would be a very interesting conversation.
Oh, listen, but my point is, I'm sure they have, right? Like I'm not trying to minimize that. There's probably there's multiple access. The problem is there's multiple accesses everywhere of people who of have some selection process that you can't see, right? My only concern is when you come to the kids and you take the kid who doesn't see the other person as any different than them. Like they really are, it's completely because we have protected them from it, right? Like we've not, as the parents, had this open air racial conversation which they can pick this stuff up from. I assume, at least I haven't, right? Nobody I know has, right? So the kids are still in their bubble. And I get your point as well. As long as they're in the bubble, it's difficult for them to empathize with people who are outside the bubble, right? But it strikes me that the continuation of that plan of going, um, um, you have people around you, you have to understand them. Everybody's not like you. You know what I mean? Heteronormativity, you have different things on this axis, you have different things on this axis, and you have to realize everyone's not you. And when you hit somebody who's not like you, right? Don't assume the worst in them. You know what I mean? Reach out and find out, what's going on and some sort of connectivity, right? But the question is, if that kid asks the other kid, right, what about this religious dress? Why do you have a cross around your neck? Why do you have two moms? Right? And they just, let's say they freeball ask this question to their curiosity on. Is the resulting response, oh, great, you're asking something about me? I agree. You know what I mean? You're asking about something me. I'll explain this to you. And great, fantastic. We have more people in more connections, you know what I mean, that understand each other on Earth because they've now had this conversation, right? Or when this interaction occurs, is it, well, you've offended this person, you've asked an inappropriate question. You see what I mean? And now what we've done, there's no improved communication between humans now because that person still didn't get the story of why, doesn't understand that person any better. We just have an over the top training model, knowing that they shouldn't ask, right? So I think that's the differential, at least in my mind.
Okay, I think that a lot of that sort of questioning is sort of where it comes from. Like if it's that whole you've just met someone new and they look different and where are you from kind of thing. Well, that's rude, right? Um, because it makes an assumption. It's making the assumption that they're from somewhere else outside. Of Canada, perhaps. But it's all about relationships. I think if you build a relationship and you build trust, you will be able to have those sorts of conversations. But if a conversation comes out of nowhere and it comes from a place of sort of privilege, like I am this person and I will ask you, something that is potentially quite personal, and I hardly know you, then that would be inappropriate. But if you've built a relationship with someone eh, and this kind of grows out of the relationship in a mutual sharing kind of way, I'm sure that would work out fine.
Yeah, well, and this is why. Listen, I don't know. Again, I have no master plan on how to mediate any of these things.
Certainly, I don't either.
I'm just saying that.
I think we're all working through this as humans.
Yeah, I'm just saying from my perspective, when the person asks where you're from, right? You know what I mean? That is what they're trying to do. They're coming up to you and they're saying, "Where are you from?" Right? And what that person is doing is trying to hunt around for some common context with which to talk to you. So they say, like, I meant, "Where are you from?" And I don't know where the person's from, but they're from Toronto. It just goes like this: "Oh, they're from Toronto. I lived in Toronto. Oh, my parents grew up in Campbellville. My parents Campbell grew up too." If it had been someone else and they said, "Oh, I grew up in Egypt," I'd be like, "Oh, really? I've been to Egypt." You know what I mean? And have like a little conversation. And see this, like we just good podcast because we just elucidated something very massive, right? Group one thinks when they ask that question. I think a lot of people, if they were to ask that question, they think that is what they're doing. They are trying to make a connection with this person. They are trying to understand. They're hunting around for some commonality, right? Or they're interested in the person. That's why you're asking that question. Because if you're not interested in the person, or you can say nothing. Right? It's just easier now to say nothing. Oh, I won't ask that person where they're from. I won't have any contact to do with them whatsoever, because there's a whole maze of stuff that I could say that might trigger this response, right? It's the definition of saying, well, if you say that, it could hurt the person's feelings. I agree, that's true. But I don't necessarily think that everyone who says that has a negative intention in mind. And that's why we've got two people on
No.
two groups in completely different planets, right?
Yeah, there's intention versus impact, though, is always sort of the thing. That's where a lot of issues come from, is that misunderstanding. And again, I would just, always encourage the relationship building, so that, conversations can happen.
Yeah, and that's my only point is, we have two. It seems to be in this little tableau we've produced. We have person one who is trying to build a relationship, and the way they're trying to build a relationship is asking them something that they consider as innocuous as, "Where are you from?" Right? Person two, when they hear "Where are you from," might interpret it. Who knows how they're going to interpret it? Might interpret it as, this is some attempt to, I don't even know what, displace me or other me or whatever, and we're off to the races. So now the question is, if person one wants to build a relationship, well, what question is, like, what is a good opener?
I don't know. I'm not. I'm,
Yeah, I'm not saying you are, but do you see what I mean? How you can create this construction, which it strikes me that makes the person crawl back, and they go, okay, well, I know that in my racial group, whatever your in racial group is, I can go up to that person. I can ask where they're from. I can ask what they ate yesterday. I can make a joke that's even off color or inappropriate. You see what I mean? And as long as I'm in the pocket, I know that the social reaction, the correct social reaction, is acceptance, right? You just know that that's the correct social reaction in this weirdo in group that we've stapled in the thing, right? But then once you go across groups in the school system, we're saying, well, hold on, that's a not. So I mean, the problem to solve is, how do you create a relationship building a relationship building process that's guaranteed not to cause offense? I guess is the strikes me that's very difficult, and it's even harder to implement into the minds of kids that are being mean to each other.
yeah. Well, I think that's. There's a lot of socialization that happens at school. There's a lot of socialization that happens at home. I think that there needs to be a good combination of things that happens. Um, and yeah, I think that's it is a hurdle that I'm sure we all feel, is that initial, like, how to build the relationships. And I mean, during the pandemic, it's been even sort of harder because we don't get to actually see people in person. So, or haven't been able to. So those socialization skills are even tougher, and people have very much been isolated into their own communities more. You're more isolated with your families and stuff, rather than meeting new people at like a town hall or some other interconnective kind of event, festivals, or whatever. That sort of thing is not happening. So it really does fall back to family in that way. And yeah, it's something we all have to just kind of work on. I don't think that I don't think I have the answer right here to give you, Greg.
I was sure you would have one size. I'm sure you had solved. So I just got a couple more things left. So one thing that I just wanted to bring to your attention. This is just my hobby horse. If you think I haven't been working the interview with hobby horses, so they do a Great Lakes. They do like a survey of all the provinces around the Great Lakes in the states, right? And then they figure out the GDP of each one of them. So the GDP per person. They convert it Canadian dollars, US dollars, depending what side of board you are. So the problem is Ontario GDP, it's going down compared to the extra ones, right? So if you take the GDP for Ontario, it's 61 grand a person, right? But we are second worst in this chart. New York's got 110. That's fake. We can throw that out because it's a big city. It's got density. It's got money flowing in. You can throw that out. But you go up the line, Michigan's got 65,000, Indiana 68, Ontario 72, Wisconsin 70, Philadelphia 76, Minnesota 87, and Illinois is up to 84. And the point of the comparison is these are all places that have the exact same, pretty much the same environment. They're all around the Great Lakes, and they're therefore fair comparisons because they're in the same region. And that's been going down. We've been going down. We've been going down. And so Ontario's lagging behind its peers in per capita income, and you're starting to see like 16,000 less per person, right? Like these states are going to end up much richer than Ontario if we keep this up. I'm always freaked out about this, and nobody else seems concerned. Should I seem concerned or?
Are you feeling it?
No, I think it's dangerous. I think it's really it's eventually you'll get into modes where you run out of money. You become impoverished compared to the places around you. You know what I mean?
Um, I, I certainly think we need to keep an eye on it. We do have certain advantages over the states, especially around universal health care and things like that, that I'm not sure how they balance into figures like that. Um, I think that, and we keep drawing people up from the states now. Of course, not since the pandemic. Everything I say seems to be about the pandemic, but um, there are a lot of people that are drawn north across our borders because of quality of life and that sort of thing. And so, um, I don't know. It's definitely something to keep an eye on, and on trying to understand the true implications of that long term.
Yeah, because I like all the stuff. See, this is the thing. The productivity is in conflict with all the stuff you like, right? Like vacations are great. I like vacations. I think people should have vacation time, right? The 10 weeks in the States and no maternity leave, I think is crazy as crazy could be, right? But the problem is it does get more stuff done. So you have to have a high productivity per person, right? To to paper over all this extra vacation time, you know what I mean, or these I'm going to say benefits, to people, which I like, but I want to keep them.
Yeah.
And if your productivity compared to places around you keeps slipping, not today, not tomorrow, but eventually you're somewhat screwed, uh, because all that extra money is bouncing around those states. It's not bouncing around your state necessarily. Obviously, there's cross-border trade and the like. So I'm always freaked out about that.
I'll put that in my back pocket.
Put that in your back pocket. And the next is preparing for the next crisis before it happens and listening to sector experts. See, I read the website. I didn't.
Yes, I noticed that. Yeah, I just I feel that I hope that this government is learning lessons. I feel that that's probably not the case, though. Um, that they actually study what happened and move forward. And if we are ever in a pandemic again, what is the right route to go? When talking about shutdowns, talking about vaccination, talking about schooling, what, where are we going for the next time? It's been 100 years since there was the other Spanish flu pandemic, but these things happen and may happen more frequently because we are much more globalized than we were a century ago. I'm personally a little surprised that it's taken us a century to have a global pandemic. But we've had fits and starts of other sorts of pandemics, the H1N1 and stuff like that. But even beyond that, as climate change certainly there's we need to be prepared for as things change. What should we be doing? Where should we be putting our um, efforts in pointing people towards specific areas of the workforce so that we're prepared? What should we be we didn't have any sort of manufacturing for vaccinations in Canada. Perhaps and that really bit us a bit, right? So we've kind of caught up now, but what we should be looking at the gamut of things. We actually just completed this at the board level. Um, we trustees asked for staff to do a comprehensive sort of study of things, and so we have something now that we can look to should this this sort of thing happen again. I want that kind of thing in place at the provincial and at the federal level as well.
I almost want elected, like an elected public agent of health, because this person, because what's happened is like a respiratory virus pounds out about once every 7 years, right? You had SARS, you had these things. They didn't blow up, right? But the problem is when they're on the initial radar, you don't know if they're going to blow up or not. So the next time one of these things rolls out, this whole public health mechanism will attempt to repower day one. It'll just like, we're powering up day one, because it's a siloed group of experts who's trying to avoid contagions going through society, right? And if you just never see your friends or family again, it's a lot easier to avoid contagion, right? It's just, that's the reality of it.
Yeah.
They go there, they're going to go there right off the bat next time. They're going to be like, if you want, because they don't know initially, right? Like initially it's just like one case, then 8 cases, then 16 cases. It seems to be getting out of control of someone else. Is this other place really like us? You know what I mean? They have a different climate. They have different age groups. They don't know, right? They can't tell. To this day, they don't know. They have computer models to project out things, but it could be that just because people don't want to deal with COVID, they'll just be having picnics all summer and it doesn't matter what you do. It'll be fine. People will be doing haircuts outdoors. They might just have enough internal, I don't know, fear that they won't go back to normal. You don't need any rules at all. It'll be fine. It could be that you need to, who knows, what the situation is. I mean, I personally I would have been the last person, not only to shut down the schools. You wouldn't believe what would have to be happening for me to shut the schools down. But I would have been very pained to even adjust them. Like I would have just every single adjustment with the masks and the weirdness, and the teachers don't go near the kids, so they don't really get the same, teacher looking over your shoulder while you're doing math. Every one of them, I would just have my claws in and be the slowest person to move and the quickest person to run back to normal. I'd have it back to normal in September, because I know that model is doing the least harm to the kids that I can imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I have no idea if this is a near fatal event in terms of their educational opportunities. I don't know. Right? It could be screwing up their social development. Who knows? Right? And I'd put them back absolutely normal right off the cuff, because the just personally the fear of that unknown is greater than the known of managing COVID outbreaks here and there, which I suspect we're going to be doing anyway. But that's me. I'm luckily or unluckily in no position to make any of these happen. But you are, so you got a bigger problem than me. So what's next?
I'm kind of a very focused person about what I have to do in the near future, and then what comes after that is really dependent on what I'm doing. I definitely want to put a great run in for the provincial election. I really feel that I am a great candidate to bring some consolidation to the left side of the spectrum. And I feel that way because in my work in education, I think I've built up a certain amount of trust and integrity among education workers who are a big part of this region and the city. And they with that trust, education workers uh, tend to be on the left side, but many tend to um, vote more on the NDP side of things. So I think that having someone like myself, who is a known name, who has stood up and been very forthright about what the issues are during the pandemic and pre-pandemic, because we had issues back in 2019 around um, class size averages and forcing e-learning at the high school level. They wanted province wanted 4 courses e-learning. I mean, now we look back and go, but there needs to be so they've, even though the perspective that I talked about these issues and fought on these issues were in the line of uh, student achievement and well-being, because that is my mandate. It didn't feel that we were far from the unionized positions out there, because just different 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 potential motivations, though I do think the unions do think of course, the students as well. That we they heard me a lot, and they heard some of the messages I gave through the media and beyond. Um, and I think that they would be willing to trust me with their vote next year. And in this particular riding, Burlington is a stronghold, a PC stronghold. Over decades, we have had PC after PC, and the only person that broke through was in 2014. That was Eleanor McMahon. So we need a strong candidate to galvanize, bring people over into one area, into the Liberal tent, and break through again. And that's me. I know it is. So that's what I want to see. That's why I want to be the candidate in this nomination race, and I want to be the Liberal candidate on the ballot next June.
Excellent. Well, I think listen. I think you've done very well. I think you've shown yourself to be a serious, incredible candidate across a lot of different issues and a background passion. So that's very heartening. Sometimes different political parties run candidates in ridings that they consider throwaway, and therefore it doesn't really draw someone with the actual gravitas to really win. You know what I mean? And to become sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy, because you need people to support you. No, it just goes, nobody will support you. Becomes impossible to win. You need one. So you definitely have to have credible candidates if you expect people to come out and give their time and spend their time and energy supporting you. So I definitely think you're a credible candidate. I mean, in terms of a real legitimate wish to work on these things and go forth. And thank you very much for your time.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity, Greg.
Excellent. And if you guys would like to know more, it's Trust Andrea at trustandrea.com. Thanks very much.